In May 2006, when I was working on the German version of my book Race Against Death, I saw a photo of the crime scene which I had not previously seen. Fortunately, the photographer had an unusual name, Pedro P. Polakoff III, which was at the bottom of the photo. Soon I was on the phone with him. He had been the only press photographer at the scene, arriving there 10 to 12 minutes after the shooting, and he had taken 31 photographs, 26 of which he still had, and which he sent my way. We then communicated via email until I was finally able to meet him in a Philadelphia suburb in August of 2006. In the meantime, he showed me a lot of details in his photographs that I hadn't even noticed as one who was not there. Two aspects stick out in particular. They concern the star witnesses of the prosecution, Robert Chobert and Cynthia White. In other words, the two witnesses which stand in the center of the suppression of exculpatory evidence we are discussing tonight, the famous Brady issue. The evidence shows that Chobert asked prosecutor Joseph McGill for money and that the prostitution charges pending against White were all miraculously dropped after judicial officers in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts had exchanged memoranda which stressed that she had been a witness in a very important case and that Joseph McGill had a keen interest in the proceedings. The core meaning of the Polakoff photos is that Joseph McGill had very good reason to take good care of these witnesses, because these photos blow the whole prosecution theory of the events and of how Officer Faulkner was killed completely out of the water, and with it the testimony by Chobert and White on which this theory is based. Before I walk you through the Polakoff photos, let's listen to how prosecutor Joseph McGill in the film Case for Reasonable Doubt describes the events that led to the death of police officer Faulkner and the murder charge against Mumia Abu-Jamal.
He runs over and takes out this Charter Arms revolver and fires and shoots the officer in the back. The officer then manages to turn around a little bit because of the momentum of the bullet. It did not affect the vital organs at that time, and was able to get off a shot at that time, which hit Mr. Jamal in the chest area. He then, that is, Officer Faulkner, continued to fall down. And as he fell down straight on the pavement area, he was, for all intents and purposes, debilitated. The defendant, Mr. Jamal, at this point, having been stopped, went over and straddled the officer, took both hands and held the weapon that he pulled out previously and fired 4 times. One of the shots, that is the second shot or third shot, we don't know which, actually went through the, in between the eyes of the officer's head. That was the killing bullet.
You have heard prosecutor Joseph McGill's version of the events. According to him, Billy Cook, Mumia's brother, was stopped by Officer Faulkner. They stood within what you see on the picture as the green square. Abu-Jamal saw the stop, ran across the parking lot, shoots Faulkner in the back. The officer falls down and while falling gets off a shot, wounds Abu-Jamal, who then stands over him and kills the officer execution style by firing several shots, only one of which hits but kills him. The question really then is, who are the witnesses for this? You see them in the 3 circles. One of the witnesses, that's the blue circle, stood with his car on the other side of 13th Street on Locust before a traffic light. And he basically confirmed what you just heard from McGill. But the problem with him was that he was unable to identify Abu-Jamal as the shooter, and so he was much less valuable to the prosecution than the other two witnesses. And the other two witnesses were Robert Chobert, that's the yellow circle, who claimed to have stood right behind the police cruiser of Officer Faulkner, and Cynthia White, who claimed to have stood at the southeastern corner of 13th and Locust. Chobert said he saw only the end of the events. He was a cab driver and claimed to have let out a fare when he heard shots, and then he looked up and saw what McGill just described. Cynthia White, in her turn, claimed to have seen the whole sequence. Abu-Jamal ran across the parking lot, shoots Faulkner, gets shot. She did not see that, but she claimed she saw the execution style killing of Officer Faulkner. And this is where the photographs come in, to which we now directly jump. When Pedro arrived, 10 to 12 minutes after the shooting, he found something that was both unforgettable and, as he later said, the most unprofessional handling of a crime scene that he had ever seen.
There's some things that we never forget. I can even tell you the developer that I used, how long those negatives were developed. Detectives weren't even on the scene at that point. No crime units were on the scene. It was pretty much open. The only thing that prevented me from actually inadvertently walking up behind and going over the blood trail itself was the fact that they had a single police barrier to the one side, and the only other thing they had at the other side was a police officer standing there saying, "Don't walk, stay back."
In our email communication, Pedro also alerted me to some things that I had not seen by myself. One of them was the mishandling of Abu-Jamal's and Officer Faulkner's guns by an officer by the name of James Forbes, who held the guns in his bare hands and who happened to be one of only two officers who claimed to have seen Abu-Jamal's gun next to him when they arrived at the scene. This mishandling of the guns, which he swore he did not do in court, severely undermines his credibility.
Did it seem like they were doing much forensic work, or...?
They weren't doing any forensic work.
Really?
Come on, the one officer's walking around holding the police officer's gun and the alleged murder weapon in his hands. With
no gloves?
No gloves. No gloves. Didn't bag it. Nothing. I mean, the whole time I was there, he's walking around with the guns in his hand.
One pillar of the prosecution's theory of the case is that apart from Officer Faulkner, Billy Cook, who was not charged with the murder, and Abu-Jamal, there was no one else at the scene, so that only Abu-Jamal could have done it. With regard to that, Pedro alerted me to another interesting fact, namely that Officer Faulkner's police hat, which was later on found on the ground, was originally on the roof of the passenger side of Billy Cook's VW, strongly indicating the presence of a fourth person at the scene, who might then have run away and who might actually have been the one who killed Officer Faulkner.
Polakoff's photos also illustrate other discrepancies at the crime scene.
You'll notice right here on the top of the Volkswagen we have Officer Faulkner's hat. This is the shot that the newspaper picked up. You'll now notice that Officer Faulkner's hat is down on the ground.
The mishandling of the gun and the wandering hat are certainly interesting pieces of evidence, but what does all of this have to do with our witnesses Chobert and White? Well, the best comes last. Let's take an ultra-quick walk through the crime scene with Let's take an ultra-quick walk through the crime scene with Pedro Polakoff as he arrives at 4 o'clock in the morning on December 9th, 1981. First thing he sees is the VW with the hat still on it, then the bloodstream of the officer. Next thing is Officer Forbes mishandling the gun. Once again, the immediate crime scene. Officers around, still thinking about what to do. This is the perspective on 13th and Locust with Officer Faulkner's car, the rear. Police hat still on the VW. Another perspective on 13th and Locust. And here for the first time we see the police hat on the ground. Finally, the scene is sealed off by the police 20 minutes after the shooting. Once again the officer, here from the back as he is mishandling the gun. Once again the hat on the ground. But the most interesting thing is what you don't see. What we should see on the 8 following photographs, and what actually would have to be there if the prosecution witness's testimony were true, is the following. All 3 prosecution eyewitnesses, alleged eyewitness said that the perpetrator, according to White and Chobert, it was Abu-Jamal, stood over the prone officer, fired away at him, hitting him only once and killing him, with all the other shots missing. And the question we need to ask is, where are the bullets that missed the officer, or where is any trace of those bullets? As we will see, Pedro took photographs from various angles, and in a moment we will also see from different directions. And however hard we look, those bullets or gunshot traces are simply not there. And in case there is any doubt, Philadelphia journalist Dave Lindorf took some of those photographs to a NASA specialist who investigated them with special methods. Even he could not detect any traces of those gunshots. And the meaning of this fact, demonstrated by 8 photographs, is very clear. What the prosecution witnesses testified at Abu-Jamal's trial, in particular the main prosecution witnesses Robert Chobert and Cynthia White, was simply not true. But it gets worse. Pedro's first photographs were taken in a very quick succession, and this is the 8th one. What we see to the right is the rear of Officer Faulkner's police car, and what we see behind it is, once again, nothing. This is the space where Robert Chobert should have been, but as the photograph shows, not only did he tell the untruth about the events that he claimed to have observed, he also told the untruth about where he had been because he was not there. We know from the police radio that against the rules he had moved his cab and drove to the police precinct to give his statement, but we know from the police radio that he should have still have been there when Pedro took his photograph, but he is not. This is the same witness who, after the trial, wrote a letter to the prosecutor asking, "Where is my money?" Each time I watch these photographs, I'm thinking of Donald Rumsfeld's comment on the non-existent weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. That is, even if we can't find the WMD, they must be somewhere out there. But these photos pass even the Rumsfeld test. We're not looking at a whole country like Iraq, but two tiny spots at 13th and Locusts, and we see the evidence of absence. The bullets that Abu-Jamal allegedly shot at Faulkner are not there, and the alleged witness Robert Chobert is also not there. As my friend Lynn Washington loves to say, sometimes pictures tell more than 1,000 words. So to me it seems that prosecutor Joseph McGill had very good reasons to bribe his two star witnesses and then suppress the evidence of the bribery. For more, check out the website dropthecaseagainst MumiaAbu-Jamal.com. And finally, I want to thank Pedro Polakoff for sharing this important evidence with me.